your career obviously wasn't that extensive. You wrote a few articles for the Mom Guess What. Where would you like to start in this process?
Well, I think, now I'm not sure of this because you guys were digitizing the early Mom Guess What, and the Lavender Library didn't have them either. So I think I'm not sure about the early stuff. I remember doing more for Mom Guess What before I started the syndicate, but once I started the syndicate, it looked like she picked up that.
So do you want to let's talk about the founding of the syndicate and why you did that?
Oh, well, I had been writing for a while then. And the thing I noticed was that, the gay and lesbian press was growing. And there were presses being founded all over the country. And what I saw, even in those newspapers, was that it was news and some features, but it wasn't profiles of everyday people and how being gay affected their lives. So that's what I wanted to write about, because actually I'm kind of a tiny percent of the lesbian population because I chose to become gay. I just was so sick of the sexism. I thought it has to be better with women. They at least will help you or help you with your career or be encouraging or whatever. And so took me a while to make the transition, but I eventually did. And I found women to be much more supportive of my career and my aspirations. And, that was really nice. So then I wanted to, in a sense, I wanted to give something back. But it was only because I was supporting myself on my writing, it was only through having a syndicate nationwide. I mean, I think I had like 30 papers, most of the major cities, because they paid like $25 and $50 or they paid $10 or whatever. The only way to make it really work for me for the time was to send it out to a lot of people or a lot of magazines and newspapers.
How long did you do the syndicate?
I think I started at about 1984, 85, something like that, when I moved here. And then I did it until I got Superstars published in 1993. And then I just decided, there's not much money in journalism. I mean, back then I was doing trade journals and I was doing mainstream writing. I was writing for Gannett News Service. I was writing for AP. And, the money just was not going up. And I bought a house and had a mortgage. And I thought, maybe you should just go into PR. So about 1993, I sold out.
I saw that you opened your own PR firm, and I understand the journalism thing because it doesn't make a lot of money. And I think one of the things with Linda, with Mom Guess What, is that it was constantly trying to get the ads and all of that. It was a tough job.
Oh, yeah, especially selling ads. Mm-hmm. Because I think at that point the market wasn't as great as it might be now. Hopefully, I don't know. It's
tough to sell ads no matter what, I think.
Well, yeah.
And newsprint is in decline.
Oh, yeah, and it has been for so long. I mean, anything but social media, it seems, or, visual media of some sort.
So when you were as a journalist, was your main focus, though, to get those everyday stories out of people that were living as gay and lesbian?
Yes, or even sometimes I did a man named Howard Wallman in Los Angeles. He was a closeted gay man, and he asked me not to send it to the LA papers. And I said I wouldn't, and so there were things like that. That Yeah.
But you published it elsewhere, just not in LA?
Yes, I published it elsewhere, and I'm sure people in other cities saw it, but probably not his clients. His clients were, local. I mean, if you're in LA, you can have a lot of clients in LA that, wouldn't necessarily, or maybe they wouldn't even have cared by then.
What year was that?
I don't know.
I
I think it was later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to think that stigma has not gone away in any, people are still afraid to come out as gay?
I don't know. It's hard to say. California, especially Northern California, is kind of a country of its own. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Alabama or some of these other places, where it's really conservative. And maybe people still wouldn't feel comfortable.
Well, I think there probably is in other parts of the country. And the reason I ask that question is there still a need for someone to be writing about this today?
There might be, for a younger journalist, something like that, who was experiencing the problems. I'm not sure anybody in California, maybe Southern California, I don't know, but I'm not sure anybody in California, because things have changed so much. Now there's all this trans stuff and kids are saying, I don't want to be one gender or another. It's really different.
They don't want to be, they choose how they want to identify.
Yeah.
I know, I just came back from a conference and I had to specify how I wanted to be referenced, which I hadn't done that before.
Yeah, she, her. or it. I'm tired of it. Them. Theirs.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. So, but as you were writing like this one for Mom, Guess What? The most exciting queer job in America. So you're writing about this woman,
Tori Osborne,
who's the director of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force.
Yeah.
So when you were like with her, how did you define the most exciting job for a queer job? What qualified that?
I think for her, it was being able to spend her time working on issues that she really cared about. That was looking into the future and saying, what do we need to do? What's our focus? What's the most important thing that we need to do? And then what are the things that are not as important, or maybe what's, for the future, how could this change? How do we want to see it change? And then what we work on. So I think that's how I interpret it. Whether I wrote that in there, I don't remember.
Well, I'm just curious, as a journalist, did you have, you wanted to write about everyday people, but were there specific things about them, that example about, moving forward with recognition of the community in some way?
Not necessarily. Well, a lot of the people, like if you look at the profiles of the people I wrote about in Sacramento, a lot of them were doing things like Shireen Miles was, I think, the California president of NOW. So they were activists in some way. But Audrey Mertz was just, your average person. But I wrote about her giving money and all the different causes that she gave to, and she said to me, I just started out giving small amounts and now I'm giving to all these places, so it was just kind of, or I wrote about custody cases sometimes and things like that, whatever, whenever I heard about someone that I thought was interesting, it was harder at first because it was more local, but as I got well known, and I had, like the New York Native, or, a paper in Chicago, Windy City Times, or something in Florida, or wherever, then I could do things like, I could call Armistead Maupan and talk to him about interviewing him.
I loved his books, by the way.
Oh, I know. They were absolutely wonderful. And he lives at the top of a hill. You have to go up like 20 flights of stairs to get to his place. But he's a really, he was a lovely Southern gentleman.
Well, maybe let's take a step back and talk about, had you always planned on being a journalist?
I always wanted to be a writer, and even as a child, I was writing these little plays and sketches, but then I started writing poetry and kind of prose poems, and I actually did get some of that published before I moved to Sacramento. So I always had it in mind to be a writer. My mother wanted me to have a career. She was really adamant about that, and I remember in the 1960s, I think it was mid-60s, and I was in high school, and the history teacher said that it wasn't as important for women to go to college because they'd only get, marry and get pregnant. And I threw a fit and went immediately to the principal's. And he said, well, that is true. And I went home and talked to my mother, and she went to see the principal. And, by then, there were like millions of women on the pill, and there was this huge revolution going on that was going to wipe not all of that out, but it was going to get rid of a lot of that argument that you couldn't train women in jobs because they're just going to get married and have children. So that was something I had always known, is that I wanted a career. And I thought first of being a novelist, but was really, really difficult. And you don't make much money on it unless you write bestsellers. And I didn't see myself doing that. What I wanted to write about was really different. So I eventually realized, Dale, you could make money as a journalist, and you could really hone your writing skills. And one of my many exes actually was a journalist, and she taught me how to write. And we moved here together, and she was wonderful because she edited all my stories to start with before I ever turned them in. And she was really hardcore. She was like old school journalist, like you study AP Styles sheet and you have to know it. And she would say things like, Del, you should know this. I shouldn't have to be changing this. If you're going to do this, you need to memorize all of this stuff, and eventually, I memorized it enough to know that I needed to look it up, and that made a huge difference, being able to write. And, at this one point, I remember one of the trade journal editors, because I wrote for a lot of trade journals, saying to, always giving me assignments. And this is when I had first started and I wasn't a very good writer yet, and I said, I've just really started and you're giving me all these jobs. Can I ask you why? And he said, well, you get your work in on time. And he said, if somebody gets it in on time like you do, I can fix it. If there's some prima donna that can't get it in on time, then there's nothing. I don't have time to deal with it. And so, I was just very serious about, this is a deadline, this is a deadline. And even when I was taking care of my mother, who was at that point was still at home and was kind of flipping her cookies about not being able to walk and maybe having to go into a nursing home and trying to get her back on her feet, and she was very upset one day. And I had one of the editors call from one of these trade journals, and you could hear her screaming in the background. And he goes, Dale, this doesn't sound like a good time. If you can't get the story done, I can substitute something else if you need me to do that. And I just said to him, the work is keeping me sane. I'm going to have this story in on time, because it was. I mean, it just, it's very difficult to deal with your parents when they're getting really elderly and dying. I mean, it's profound on one level, and, it's horrifying on another, and it's so difficult. But for me, I managed to do what I could do, and the work it really did save me, and I was so glad I, became a journalist.
So it's just did your mother know that you decided to be gay, or was she still alive?
Yes, and in fact, she really liked one of my exes, this British man, and he had come over to California to be with me. I lived in London for 5 years. I married there, and my first husband was there. And then John came over to California to be with me, and he was a sweetheart. I mean, he was really a nice man. And my parents just loved him. And my mother was like, well, I can't see why you didn't stay with John. He's really nice. And I'm like, yeah, he's really nice, but he's not supportive of my career, and that's what I want. I don't want to live with that.
He didn't want you to work?
Well, no, he was sarcastic about my career. It wasn't that he didn't want me to work. He was just sarcastic about my dreams, that I wanted to have a book published someday. And it was actually through the profiles that I got the book published. So.
Did he think, was it because you were a woman, or?
No, actually I realized later, because we're still good friends, that he didn't have much ambition for himself either. It wasn't really, and I think he felt very threatened that I had so much ambition, that I had these dreams and goals. And also I was thinking about becoming gay then. In fact, I had already decided I wanted to, but I was just finding it really difficult. I didn't look the part, and I didn't act the part, and I had a British accent, so I didn't sound the part. So it was just hard. It took me a while. It actually took me moving to LA and meeting an older woman who was more simpatico.
So how did you not? I guess in my mind, I don't define what gay women look like. So,
well, at the time, the local gay women all looked very masculine, and it wasn't like now where you can look however you want. You can look really, really, really femme, or you can look really, really, really butch. There was more like a push to be butch, and I had longer hair, long curly hair, and I wore makeup, and I thought, I've already been a hippie stereotype. I don't want to be a stereotype again. I just want to be who I am, but I do want to see what life would be like with women. If it would be more supportive and maybe more emotional, and I don't know, more connected is what I was looking for. Something more like what I had with my mother. Not that I was in love with my mother, I really wasn't. But
she was supportive of you.
She was very supportive of me, yes. And we had a close relationship for many, many years. And I was lucky when my mom finally had to go into a nursing home and my dad started getting dementia, that I was able to just drive down to Southern California, pack him up, put him in the car, and this was over a weekend, and bring him back to Sacramento. And that I had, however long that he was at home with me, to get to know him. because it was a really interesting experience. I hadn't known him nearly as well as I knew my mother.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think that was? Was he working all the time?
Well, he was working, and also my mother just, especially once I left home, she wanted my time if I was there. And my father was fine with that. You know, he knew it would make her happy, and that was what he wanted. You know. So.
And did he have any reaction to you deciding to be gay?
Not really. I mean, he wasn't, my mom was like, yeah, all right. My dad was like, oh, I don't know. But he wasn't, you know, he wasn't a really emotional person unless he got angry all of a sudden. And then he might scream and shout, and that would be it. And then he'd feel better, and then he'd apologize, you know, and that would be it, you know. And this was in a day when, you know, children could be abused, and I mean, they could be beaten with belts and who knows what, and it was okay. I mean, children didn't really have any rights. I don't know if they do now, but my understanding is that child rearing practices are a little bit more human. They're more like what I was raised with.
So you moved up here to Sacramento. Was this, did you find this, or did one of the things with other people when we've talked to them about the newspaper is that it helped them find community? Did you have a similar experience with that, or no?
No, because the woman across the street from the house, you know, I bought was gay. And she was very cagey about it. But she said, oh, there's this art show. Would you guys like to go to that? So we went to this art show, and we walk in, and it's all women. We're like, oh, well, now we know about the neighbor, you know. And then there was a gay male couple and another gay lesbian couple in the next block. And then there was another lesbian couple in the block on the other way, and that was a 3-block area between J Street and Folsom that kind of blocked off the street.
So it was a community.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, you know, we weren't all good friends or anything, but it felt comfortable, you know, especially coming at that point. My ex and I had been traveling around, and coming from the Midwest, it felt really good.
Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah. So when in that time period did you write for Mom Guess What?
As far as I can tell, it might have been a little bit earlier, but from 84 till about 93. Now, a lot of those were the profiles. So I'm, you know, it might have been, well, I got here in 84, at the end of 84, so let's say 85. And I saw some things, I think maybe I started the profiles in 86 or 87, because I saw some articles before, but mostly after that it was all the profiles. But, you know, I thought it was important that you know, I work on the gay paper if I could, or at least write articles or give them articles I was already writing, you know.
But you weren't commissioned specifically to write for Mom Guess What?
I might have written some stories, you know, I don't remember. I mean, I think I probably did. Just given, I mean, I looked back, and mostly what I saw were the profiles, but most of the copies I saw didn't start until 87. So, and I got here in 85, and you know.
They were around earlier than that.
Yeah, and I soon found out about the whole gay community just by going to this art exhibit, which was just a few weeks after I moved here, you know, so I'm sure I knew about the paper by then, and, you know, started writing for Linda.
Because a lot of people have talked to us about how the newspaper helped them meet and form a broader community outside of a bar environment. But obviously,
Yeah.
you had a different experience with that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when your neighbor across the street is gay, and there are gay people all over the place, and then, you know, you go to an art exhibit and meet a whole lot of other lesbian women. Yeah. I mean, I probably heard about MGW through that and then went there to see about writing, see what I could do.
But you were enough of an independent journalist, you weren't going to go work for the newspaper.
No, I you know, I was already writing for trade journals and things like that.
And you were mainly, you would be hired to do other things for the trade journals. You weren't just doing the
trade journals. I had a whole mainstream career that I was doing. I was writing for California Magazine, which I guess is in style now. And I was writing for Executive Place, which is Comstocks now.
And I saw you wrote for Sacramento Magazine.
Sacramento Magazine and AP, Gannett News Service. So I was doing all sorts of stuff. And this was just like the profiles and things were just something I did once a month.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You know.
Okay. And then you transitioned into a PR firm.
Yeah.
So as a PR firm, you're still writing, but it's a different perspective.
It is and it isn't, because it's more news-based. For me, it was more news-based. Whenever somebody called who might be a potential client, or I met somebody, the first thing I said is, what are you guys doing that's new and different? You know, so that way I was able to get something newsworthy, and then I could write a press release that was about the news that they had to offer. Like if they had something really interesting to offer, you know, I could usually get the media there. And if they didn't, I would say to them, you know, I don't think there's anything I can do for you. I mean, sometimes I could just do profiles on the person, depending on what they were doing and what magazine I thought would be interested, you know.
How long did you run your PR firm?
Probably 93 until I retired 5 years ago.
So 25 years.
Yeah. But I had some really interesting clients. I had Mutual Housing California as a client. They are an affordable housing developer. So that it was wonderful working for them. And then I also had just all sorts of interesting clients over time. In fact, this one time, it was so funny. I had gotten a client who was a dentist, and one of his partners had invented something which is actually what became dental floss. I mean, you know, and so I sent something to the media, and they sent out this woman who was a total bimbo on the air. And she was from one of the shows that was like how many ever hours long. And she walked in and she's like cracking a whip, and there's nothing bimbo about her. And she says, okay, we have 6 segments to fill. What have you got? And I went, 6 segments? To myself, because all I had was the floss. So we kind of scrambled around, and, you know, she came up with things. Oh, and the second thing she said is, and I don't want to show any teeth. So, okay. You know, and it was just fascinating because she was just like this. She was a slave driver, and she figured out what she wanted, and she and the photographer decided what the photo, the angle should be. And then she got on the air, and she's like, you know, like, I mean, it was amazing to watch. I mean, because she was obviously, no, it was local. Oh. It was one of the local morning shows. And I mean, she was obviously an actress too. So that was kind of that was my first PR experience where I had a hit. And it was just like, okay.
Sounds like somebody I dealt with.
Yeah. I mean, it was really interesting that she could come up with 5 other ideas.
Wow.
But
So, kind of, you've had such an interesting career where you've crossed. There's never been an issue that you were gay that ever seems to have impacted your profession.
not really. I mean, it's not like I told everybody. I mean, if I felt comfortable, I would tell them. But it really wasn't part of the, they didn't really care anything about me. I mean, to be honest, all they cared about was that I could get the media. And that was my job, and that was what I did. So, if I became friends or something like that, or actually I got Mutual House in California through not exactly being gay, but somebody knew somebody who knew me,
Do you think that's because it was Northern California, or would have that been different somewhere else?
I think it was because Mutual House in California was just very much more liberal than some.
No, I meant your broader career. So here, because you were doing it here in Sacramento.
Yeah.
And is it because it was?
Yeah, because I mean, I think a lot of places it may have made a difference. I don't think it would have made a difference in a lot of major cities. But, I mean, even though Sacramento was in San Francisco.
It's still California.
Yeah, it's still California. Yeah, so.
So as you look back on a very prolific career, are there things that you would say are the best of what you did, or if you had to do it over again, would you do it differently?
Well, I really like getting my books published. That was a dream that I had from a very, very early age. And actually, I got Lesbian Lists published, I think, because Sasha Allison the publisher, had seen my work, and he asked me to write a chapter in the book, You Can Do Something About AIDS, that he was editing for the publishing industry, and that was given away free as a public service. And I wrote a chapter, What to Do If a Coworker Has AIDS. And I think, and I got it in on time, and, it was usable. And I think from there, then Sasha, and seeing my profiles and, knowing that I probably had an ability to do some publicity for myself, he asked me to write Lesbian Lists. And I threw that puppy together in 6 months. I mean, it was a really tight deadline. I did nothing else but that for 6 months because there was a lot of research and there wasn't much of an internet then or anything on there, So, and then from there, I was able to get an agent, and then I was able to get Superstars, 12 Lesbians Who Changed the World, published.
So this is the first time I've seen it. Are there particular people in here that, did you go out and interview them?
No, these are historic
lesbians.
Figures.
Okay.
Lesbians, yeah. Some of whom were obviously out, and some of whom were less out.
Anna Freud.
And I wrote about how you can't know. And in the past, how that's been used to keep lesbians in the closet. Because they're not going to have children, especially in the past. Now, today they could have children if they wanted, and they do. But, for a lot of these women, you just couldn't know. In fact, Freud's daughter was involved with Dorothy Burlington, I think it was, very rich woman. And people were really shocked, and they'd been together for years and years and years. And Freud's daughter, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, Anna, thank you. She was a child psychologist, so she was very closeted, and they didn't want people to know. And Dorothy bought a They bought 2 flats, one above each other, and they had a private telephone line installed so they could talk to each other in bed at night. And then, and they were together for years, and eventually they had a country home and they had a big double bed, and people were totally shocked because they had no idea.
They were good at keeping a secret.
Yeah. When they saw the double bed, they were like, oh. I mean, it's really interesting what women had to go through in the past and potentially still have to go through depending on where you are in the world.
You've got Jane Addams. I'd never heard that Jane Addams was gay. I have to say I never looked into it one way or the other, but...
Yeah, that was, some of these things were, what I ended up saying is if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And some of these things, just like Jane Addams, seemed to me that she was gay. I mean, she didn't marry a lifelong girlfriend. That was kind of the things I looked for. If somebody had been really close friends with someone, romantic friendships, as they were called in the 19th century. If they had been romantic friends, or they had a Boston marriage, then let's just say they were gay. I'm going to go ahead and say they were gay. And I don't know who I wrote about. Maybe it was Carson McCullers. I think she was, because she was a friend of, who's the writer? Very famous, very out queer male writer. Anyway, or maybe it was, there was somebody else. Anyway, there was this woman writer who I said I thought she was gay because she had a girlfriend, Willa Cather. I think it was Willa Cather. And some academic just threw a fit and stepped in it publicly. How dare I say that? Because it was, the person she had researched and taught, and, just...
She never married, though, did she?
No.
Willa Cather never married.
No, exactly. And she had a girlfriend, as far as I could tell. It's kind of like Emily Dickinson. I mean, she was supposedly in love with the woman who married her brother. And, the woman married her brother to stay close to her. And they didn't kind of, nobody had any choice at that point.
I know the speculation was that Eleanor Roosevelt was gay because she had that friendship with,
oh, yeah, Lorena Hitchcock, or Hickok.
Hickok,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Franklin had a long-term liaison.
He had multiple liaisons from what I've seen. He made it around. But did you get a reaction to this book? The Carson McCullers not in here.
Okay, it had to be Willa Cather then.
Yeah.
She's in there, right? I think. Like I said, this has been this is so embarrassing. There's been so much water under the bridge since I wrote this.